What is up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja. I hope that everybody's having a happy new year. Hopefully everyone had a fun and safe New Year's Eve. My wife and I have a bit of a chill tradition where around this time of the year we rewatch all of the Harry Potter films. It's kind of nice. They celebrate Christmas in a lot of those movies, so they kind of feel like pseudo Christmas movies. So it's always kind of cool to rewatch those movies around this time. And we try to time it up where we only have like one or two movies left in that rewatch, so we can watch them on New Year's Eve. We order Chinese food, I make frozen margaritas, and it's a great chill time. But for those of you that did the typical New Year's Eve thing, hopefully you made it home safe. But since it's that time of the year and we're kind of closing the book on 2023, I wanted to talk about my favorite games of 2023. So without further ado, let's rock. And because the internet loves when you rank things, I'm going to be doing this video as a top 5 favorite video games of 2023. And honestly, this might be the hardest year to get it down to just 5, because as the year goes along, I always keep a running list of all the games that I play within that year. And I looked at that list to make this video, and I forgot some of the other games that I played throughout the year just because there were so many great games that kind of overshadowed some other lesser games that I had played throughout the year. And because there's so many great games, I'm gonna have to start off this video with an honorable mention, which I typically don't like to do in these top 5 videos just because it feels kind of like a cop-out. I call it a top 5, but then I end up listing like 6 or 7 games. Kind of feels like cheating. But because this year was so great for video games, this list would feel incomplete if I didn't include the game of the year, that game of course being Baldur's Gate 3. And before you click off this video or start typing a hateful comment, the only reason that Baldur's Gate 3 is an honorable mention, it didn't actually make the top 5, is for the simple fact that I just started playing it this past week. And if you saw my video where I voted for the Game Awards, you already know this, but I typically will take a few days of vacation in between the Christmas holiday and the New Year's holiday. So because of the holidays that I get from work and the vacation days, I end up getting like 10 to 15 days depending on when those holidays hit. And I typically, despite always wanting to play everything that comes out, I always have at least one big game throughout the year that just slipped through the cracks for whatever reason. And unfortunately, that was Baldur's Gate 3. And I always end up playing that game, whatever game it is. This year, of course, it was Baldur's Gate 3 during that little staycation or whatever you want to call it. And this game is massive, and I'm only about 30 hours into it, so it would feel disingenuous if I included it on my top 5. There are games coming up on this list that I have platinumed, other games I've played for hundreds of hours. So to put a game in my top 5 that not only have I not beaten, but I don't even feel like I've scratched the surface on, would feel kind of like cheating. So consider this discussion my first impressions. Of course, since I'm including this as an honorable mention, I'm loving it so far. It did take me a few hours to really get into it. It is a massive game. They do throw a lot at you at once. So it did take me a little bit to really get into it. I do have a dozen friends on Steam that have played it, and all have played it for 100 hours plus. A few have actually played it for over 200 hours, and I can definitely see why. I'm fully invested into it now. Outside of going to the gym and watching a Harry Potter movie with my wife last night, that was literally all I did yesterday, was play this game. My wife actually kind of got a little annoyed with me yesterday because she left for work while I was playing this game, and she got home and I was still playing this game and didn't even look like I had moved. I hadn't really done anything around the house, so it kind of got me in trouble a little bit. And I think the thing that I love about Baldur's Gate 3 so far is it feels like a living world. It doesn't feel like anything happens in a vacuum. you make choices and those choices have consequences. For example, and I don't think I'm spoiling anything too big because it happens very early on in the game. Like I said, I'm only about 30 hours into a game that you should play for like 100 to 200 hours. So I don't feel like I'm spoiling anything, but you have a mission early on where you're tasked with killing 3 goblin leaders. So you have to get into this goblin camp. And once you get into the camp, you can kind of walk freely amongst the goblins. And I was able to, at least with the first goblin leader, to convince her to go back to her quarters. And at that point, I was able to kill her in her bedroom by ourselves. So nobody knew that I had killed her. Well, unfortunately, the second leader, I had to kill in public. And so everybody saw me do that. So from then on, I couldn't walk freely in the goblin camp. That made it very, very difficult for me to get to the third leader and kill the third leader. Looking back now, I probably should have played it a little bit differently. I think there was a way that I probably could have killed that third leader first and then killed the other guy in public, and then it would have been fine. But that's the point. I made a choice, and that choice had consequences, where in a lot of other games, it doesn't really matter because everything happens in a vacuum. But Baldur's Gate 3 feels like a living world. That being said, I do have 2 tiny nitpicks about this game. One is more a warning for anybody that hasn't played D&D or maybe hasn't played a turn-based RPG before, and that is this game is massive. Like I've already said a couple of times, it throws a lot at you. There's a lot of things to juggle, and if you're not familiar with this game, I think because it's so popular, there's going to be a lot of people that have never played a game like this or have never played a D&D campaign and aren't used to playing a game like Baldur's Gate 3. I will just say, if you're watching this and you are one of those people, just play this game. Be patient with it. You will get it. It will take a little bit of time to get used to how everything works, but just stay patient with it. Give it some time. It's worth it. Trust me. And my other tiny complaint is more geared towards me personally or other people that have Steam Decks. Anytime that I buy a game on my PC, I want it to play on my Steam Deck as well. And technically, Baldur's Gate 3 is Steam Deck verified. It does play on the Steam Deck. It plays fine, but it's just a bit clunky just because I will say that it is impressive that this game even plays on Steam Deck. And they obviously put in work to make it playable on Steam Deck, but it just doesn't work very well. Like there's so many menus, there's so many things that you have to juggle that trying to get to all the different menus and the wheels and all that stuff, it just doesn't really work for me. Honestly, I have still been playing it on my Steam Deck, but I've kind of just been doing like the camp conversations and some little exploring because the combat just really does not work on the Steam Deck. But outside of those 2 tiny nitpicks, Baldur's Gate 3 has been awesome. It's been just as good as everyone has been saying all year, and I hate that I waited this long to play it because honestly, if I had been able to put 100 to 200 hours into this game prior to making this video, I'd say just based on the 30 hours I've already played, it would definitely be making my top 5, probably top 3, maybe top 2. But now that's out of the way, let's actually get to the top 5. And just a quick note, it turns out every game on my top 5, I've actually done a separate review of each of these games on this channel. I do have a video game review playlist on this channel. Definitely check it out if you want a deep dive on each one of these games, because it's a top 5 video, I'm only going to talk about each game for a couple of minutes. So if you do want that deep dive and you haven't seen my reviews, definitely check out that playlist. And hopefully I remember when I post this video, I will try to put the separate links to each one of these reviews in the video description down below. All right, so let's start with my number 5 favorite video game of 2023, and that is the puzzle platformer Cocoon. I've said this a few times on past videos, but puzzle platformers are my favorite genre, and it's almost guaranteed to get at least one puzzle platformer on my top 5 favorite video games every year. And this year, Cocoon was my favorite by far. The art style is amazing. I love the vibrant colors of this game, which is surprising because the same people who made Cocoon also made Inside and Limbo, which are also great puzzle platformers, but they have very dark and muted colors. It's almost like they went out of their way with Cocoon to make this game the exact opposite in that sense. I loved how each world that you explore in this game was unique. I loved stacking the globes to solve puzzles. That was really fun. Unfortunately, the boss battles were pretty basic. Cocoon would kind of give you this quick tutorial before you fought a boss, and then you just kind of had to do that thing a few times until the boss was dead. It was kind of rinse and repeat. Despite that, Cocoon was still a very fun puzzle platformer that you can literally play for free on Game Pass right now if you have that service. I couldn't suggest it more. If you know me personally or you listen to my podcast, The Nerd You're Looking For, which is, of course, a not so subtle reference to Star Wars, you know that I'm a huge fan of Star Wars. And I really enjoyed Fallen Order. It was the Star Wars video game that single player campaign gamers like myself have been clamoring for years. And they did exactly what I wanted from a sequel with Jedi Survivor. Longtime viewers already know what I'm about to say, and you can just say it with me. When you're making a sequel, take what works in the original, give us more of that, and fine-tune what you can fine-tune, add what you can add. That's all you have to do. If I'm playing your sequel and I played the original game, it's because I like the original game. Give me more of that. And they definitely fine-tuned Fallen Order really well in Jedi Survivor. I think there was things that just didn't work in Fallen Order as much as I enjoyed that game, and they fine-tuned those things really well in Jedi Survivor. They also added an open world planet as well. I really enjoyed Kubo, which kind of serves as the hub for the game. I enjoyed running into the different citizens on that planet that of course needed my help. It was really fun to explore. It certainly didn't hurt that they gave you a lot more for exploring. The rewards for exploring and just looking around and kind of getting into the crates and whatnot was a lot more than you got in the first game. They weren't just stupid ponchos. They actually gave you really good incentive to explore. What I also really appreciated about this game was how character driven it was. Sure, I loved the Souls-light action just as much as the next gamer, but the character stuff is what's really gonna stick with me at the end of the day. And I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised at how this game ended. It ended with an emotional gut punch. And the reason I'm putting this game at 4 and not higher is unfortunately because Jedi Survivor did launch with a lot of performance issues. I played this personally on PS5 and I didn't experience the issues that Xbox or PC gamers did with Jedi Survivor, but there were still some performance issues there. I mentioned this in my longer review that this game tries to kind of blend combat right into the cutscenes, and anytime that happened while I was playing this launch weekend, it would stutter, and that was super annoying. Again, it wasn't game breaking like some of the performance issues on PC or Xbox, but there was still some issues there, so I had to knock it down a bit for that. Outside of 2023 just being an overall amazing year for video games, it also felt like it was the year of the survival horror remake. The Dead Space remake almost made this list. If I had decided to make this a top 10, it definitely would have, but the RE4 remake was the superior remake, and it wasn't just a fresh coat of paint like we've seen with other remakes. A game as great as the original RE4, they could have easily just phoned in the remake and we probably still would have loved it just because the original is so good. But they didn't do that. They gave us what I think is the superior way to play this game, and that's saying a lot because I do really like the original. In the remake, Leon feels much more like the guy we see in RE2. There are still the one-liners that everybody loves, but they did cut some of the cheese out. They also turned down the thirsty stuff. I'm looking at you, jet ski conversation. Unfortunately, the escort stuff is still in the remake, which makes sense. It was such a big part of the original that they couldn't just take it all out of the remake. However, Ashley doesn't have that annoying health bar anymore, and her AI feels like it's fine-tuned to the point where she doesn't get captured as much. It's also crazy how much the knife parry changes the game in the remake. Once you get the hang of it, it does take a minute to get the hang of it, but once you do, this game feels so smooth. The knife parry to shooting them in the head to roundhouse kick is perfection. I've replayed this game probably 20 times. It is by far the game that I replayed the most in 2023, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that this game plays really well on the Steam Deck. Speaking of fine-tuning an original game and adding to it with the sequel, what they did with Tears of the Kingdom was a masterclass on how to make a sequel. Any studio with a sequel in the works should be taking notes right now. They took a game like Breath of the Wild, which in my opinion is top 50 greatest games of all time, and they managed to make it even better, which I didn't think was even possible. Honestly, going into this game, they could have just given us a sequel that was 10% worse than the original, and it still would have been a great game just because Breath of the Wild is so good. They pretty much watch how we interacted with Breath of the Wild and how people were using Link's abilities in that game to make makeshift boats and airplanes, and they said, oh, you like that? Here's new abilities where you can build those things legitimately. Oh, you hated weapon durability in Breath of the Wild? Here's an ability where you can make your weapons stronger. Yes, honestly, I would have preferred if it wasn't in the game, if weapon durability wasn't in Tears of the Kingdom, but I get it. It would have been weird for weapon durability to be in Breath of the Wild and not Tears of the Kingdom, so I get that. My actual only slight nitpick is that some of the abilities do make the shrines pretty easy in Tears of the Kingdom. If I couldn't figure out how to beat a shrine most times, I would just kind of mess around with rewind and kind of cheese it. That's really the only nitpick I have. Outside of that, Tears of the Kingdom is a great game that in most years would run away with my #1 spot and game of the year. But as I've already said a few times, 2023 was not most years. If you watch any of my recent videos, you know that Marvel Spider-Man 2 has been my game of the year for a while now. Like Tears of the Kingdom, Spider-Man 2 had a great base to work from, with the first game and the Miles Morales expansion both being amazing, pun intended. While Spider-Man 2 didn't add as much as Tears of the Kingdom did, the parry system, much like the parry system in RE4 Remake, was welcomed. The original Spider-Man game basically took the combat system from the Batman Arkham games and brought it to Spider-Man, and of course I've played all of those Batman games and I've played the 2 Spidey games, so they definitely needed to bring something new to the table to keep the combat fresh. It did honestly take me a minute to get used to the parry system just because I had the muscle memory from those other games, but once I did, it was a game changer, especially with the boss battles. They also took what is easily the worst part of the original game, which is the MJ section, and instead of just taking it out of the sequel, which I think most studios would have, they did the harder thing and they just made those sections better. Not only is it not something that I race through like I did with the first game, it's actually something I had fun with in the sequel. I never thought I would say that about the MJ sections in a Spider-Man game, but MJ is actually kind of a badass in the sequel, not the hopeless little girl that she was in the original game. And all that is great and is top 5 game worthy, but what really sets this game apart for me personally is my connection with the character. I grew up on Spidey comics. Without those comics and probably the TMNT cartoon, I wouldn't be the nerd I am today. These games are exactly the type of games 8-year-old Patty would have dreamed about playing as a kid reading those comics. While I admit this game probably won't be many people's favorite game of the year, especially in a stacked year that was 2023, I love Spider-Man and I absolutely love this game. That's why it's my #1 favorite game of the year. Well, there you have it, folks. Those are my top 5, top 6 if you include the honorable mention, favorite video games of 2023. But as with all of my videos, those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. Tell me where I was wrong. Tell me what games I missed. Tell me your favorite video game of 2023. Whatever you want, let me know. comments down below. Of course, since you made it this far in the video, I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, smash that like button. That helps us out a lot. It just tells YouTube that this video is good, and it should push it to other people that also might like this content. If you did enjoy this content, which you're this far in the video, you probably did, definitely consider subbing and dinging that bell. I post weekly gaming related content, so if you like that type of content, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?